Now we have with us Jen Vaughan. Jen is the co-chair of the Seattle TUG, is also a Tableau social ambassador and an accredited Tableau trainer. And she's really kind of, to me, a one-stop shop of all knowledge for Tableau, from building communities to server. And so Jen's going to talk with us today a little bit about server. And so without any delay, let's kick it over to Jen.
Thank you, Emily. So welcome to Tableau Fringe Festival. I'm going to share with you, over the last 4 years, I've been working with Tableau, desktop, as well as server. And my knowledge of server started from technical consulting and then moved on as a reporting user, and now I'm a Tableau Server admin. So today I'm going to share with you my learnings about how I start a conversation with someone who is interested in using Tableau as a solution. And so I'm going to describe what and the whys of Tableau, including Tableau Desktop and Server, so that you can see the combination of the two, how they work together and complement each other, and also see the delineation of the two. That helps to really set the stage for understanding using Tableau desktop and server in the enterprise. Talking about Tableau Server from an installation and reporting perspective, how that differs from the traditional standard old BI approach. Some tips on best practices, including leveraging Tableau Data Server, and then coming back to the server or service part of my title is the tips in troubleshooting, and then also working with support. If you'd like to try Tableau Server, you can go to tableau.com, view the products, and try a free trial. I believe it's either 2 weeks, and if not, you can get an extension or talk to your sales rep. So sales@tableau.com if you're interested, go to their website. So without further ado, let's get into the meat of the content, and I hope you enjoy. Questions you can ask at the end. So Tableau Desktop and Tableau Server, in the conversation of what do I need from software and from a hardware perspective, and then what do I do with that once I get it? So that's the context around the explanations and the bullet points for Tableau Desktop and Tableau Server. So with Tableau Desktop, this is where you create your workbooks, and you also create your saved data sources, which you can then publish up to Tableau Server. Tableau Server is where you consume the workbooks that you created, as well as that data. Now, there is a caveat to that as well, is that Tableau Server can also be used as a workbook creation, which we'll get into in more details further in the slide deck. So coming back to Tableau Desktop, what do you need to be able to install this? You need to have administrative rights in your client. The tech specs for Tableau explains the type of hardware that you need for both desktop and server, so good resource there. When you're connecting to data, you need to have data source permissions, as well as data source drivers. And desktop itself is where you schedule your data source refreshes in combination with that Tableau server. Now I see a commonality between desktop and server because I wrote this. I didn't add in any visual aspects to tell you that, we're talking about Tableau itself. So looking across these two columns, I see data source driver. So you need to have that installed on both the desktop and the server. And the explanation of the driver, it may be Greek to you right now. I'll go through it as well. So Tableau Server, that's that consumption where you can access this via any web-based browser. There's no client to install, and you license users by their role. Then provide permission contents to those users so that they have the capabilities on Tableau Server. There are other functions or features for sharing. And in this one, I will not be getting to the sharing features of it. So who uses Tableau? Now, we talked about the desktop that client that creates, and then the server that consumes. So here I have a picture of my Tableau desktop and the site roles as a condensed chart of what type of roles there are and what you can do on the Tableau server. I've specifically called out the publish portion of it so that you can think in terms of Tableau desktop. Okay, well, if I'm going to have somebody publish a Tableau server, I must have a license for Tableau desktop as well. When you're thinking about desktop to server, you can think of less desktop users to many Tableau server users. And of course, there's some considerations involved with the type of license you have, whether it's user-based or name-based or a core license, in terms of how many users you do throw at that server instance, as well as limiting down to other functions of, say, number of users or gigabytes stored for that site itself. I digress, and so I come back. When we're using the Tableau desktop, and that commonality between the server is that driver. And so there's the two locations that it's installed on, both ones. But why do we need that driver? And it's especially important that the drivers are consistent on both the desktop and the server. And if you have a multi-site environment, not a multi-site, a multi-server environment, you'll also want to have the drivers the same across the environments. So I have this diagram here. We're again looking at our Tableau desktop, which is doing a report. It's querying. And when it's doing that, Tableau uses a proprietary language, VizQL. When you go and you connect to data within the Tableau desktop application, you are choosing your data source, and there are some 40 plus native connections. In order for that report query to call back to a database, a multi-relational database, or a flat file, there's a certain driver that takes that proprietary language, VizQL, and optimizes it in the language of the native data source, so SQL or MDX. Then, after all of the aggregation details are pulled back from those databases or the data sources and brought to the report to render and process the data, it goes back through the driver to do the VizQL. So long roundabout way of saying, the tip is here. Do not start with the ODBC driver. If you see a native connection on the connection screen listed for a source that you use it. Secondly, if you need to, go to the ODBC. And then I mentioned earlier about the environments needing to have the same drivers installed. So you will want to have that version control set up. Maybe keep it off to a share. Tableau.com/drivers is where you access them. I have that included in this slide deck for you as a reference. And you'll want to keep those current as well to the version that you're installing of Tableau. So installation of server, what does it look like? Well, I can tell you that I've worked with many third-party applications. And the thing about working with third-party installations, and this one in particular, is that it's a black box install. So what does that mean? That means that you're going to be able to go through a wizard and set up and configure and then finish your installation. So there are no further steps that you need to take to install this. So I like the picture of the feather in that it's very lightweight to do. If you already have an existing environment, you would back up. This is a sample, very small, minor release installation steps here in terms of being able to educate what is going to be the high-level summary of steps for an installation. So take a backup, you run some Tableau Server commands on the command line, and then we install, again, automated. There'll be some configuration of your authentication method. You choose that upon startup. And whichever you choose, local or Active Directory, is set. You can't have multi-mixed authentication. You'll need to have separate environments. So then if you have other configurations with regards to how long a backgrounder query will run, or you want to name your servers, set your logo, other configurations on the server, you can do that as well after the install. And then enabling the user read-only or Tableau to have access to Tableau Server, which is the data server for Postgres. I think I said that correctly. And then some tests once you've installed, fairly lightweight. I have some test cases as well. So say you're going through a new release and you've upgraded, you want to confirm that the existing content, it opens and loads and reports. That's basically going to be opening that workbook, and the connection that you have also is a consideration as it goes back to the discussion of the drivers. After install, the drivers is one of the main problem areas if you haven't installed the latest. So again, that tip is really handy. Then also with refreshing the Tableau save data sources. If you're new to this, I'll get into this as well in terms of Tableau data sources being on the Tableau data server versus Tableau workbooks, which have the data in the workbooks, not as a separate source. So other test cases here as well as it relates to publishing a workbook and then a data source, and then subscription to a view to make sure that your schedules are set up. From a reporting lifecycle, so we have a user and they need to see finance data. And then they also want to, they don't quite know the data, so they're working with a data team, or maybe they're a data analyst who does, but they need to work with the business a little bit more to build in the requirements of the report. So I've really simplified the report lifecycle, and I hope you do too in this design, build, and improve. So it's a very highly iterative. Now with Tableau Desktop, don't wait 4 weeks to get your data ready before hooking up to your data, or start reporting. Hooking up meaning connecting to a data source and get going with reporting, because it's very helpful if you're seeing the data for the first time, whomever you are, to be able to see data anomalies, be able to really see if the data tells you stories versus what you imagine to see in terms of your requirements. So clean up some of the data as well as get to know your data before you get into the end phases of your reporting lifecycle. So that's the theory from a report lifecycle. Involve often, iterate often. The handy part of Tableau is that it's very easy to go in and change things on the fly. And you can enable that as well using Tableau Server. So continuous improvement. Now let's rethink the old BI. So moving to production, this idea of having a report that was in development, and now we want to move it to production quality. Well, what does that mean? From server to server, this is usually how it was done, was having a dev environment, a test environment, and then having a production environment. You can have one production license to 2 non-production, so you can plan your environment accordingly. So using a development or a test as running through that black box install of your new release is something that I tend to recommend, as opposed to using your development and your tests for moving reports from one server to another. Think about it more as promoting your workbooks from one project to another within a server. So project A would be test, and then you'd get your sign off, and project B would be production. You would have different users permissioned in each project within a server versus having to manage users from server to server, etc. So we could have a whole long discussion on that, and if you'd like to during the questions, feel free to do so, or offline. Data source and data server. Now let's take a data source. It's a reusable connection. That's what we have in our workbooks. We connect either live or extract. And what does that really mean? So I've used these visual cues here that when you're connected live, you save it. Your workbook is a TWBX extension. So that's the connection to your database, your file, or your web data. And then if you extract, it's going to bring it into Tableau's data engine and contain it within the workbook. Use the memory of your computer or the server, that the web browser that you're using. And in that extract, that's going to keep the data in the workbook. So you can see the extension as a .twbx, which basically equals the TWB plus the zip file of your data. So that's an unpackaged within those parentheses packaged workbook, or a TWBX. So why do we care about that as it relates to Data Server? Well, when you're in Tableau Desktop, you can publish up the data source that you're working with to Tableau Server so that users can then connect to Tableau Server and have that one source of the truth. Any fields that were created or logic that was created are going to be within that central location. Now, if you can imagine where we have 10 workbooks and they're all containing the same data source, but they're not hooked up to a Tableau data server, we're going to have to refresh, if you've scheduled your extract to refresh, multiple times, maybe all at the same time, so you're loading your Tableau server. So having that one source of data connected to multiple books will be able to reduce that. It will also remove the load to your data source as well. So if you are hooking up to a data source live and hitting that multiple times. And then, like we were talking about the driver, just to note, you won't have to install that driver on multiple clients because they're using the web browser to connect to data. So that leads us into, how do you publish a Tableau data source? And that won't be covered, but it will be covered in the sense of the explanation of how to get there and what it looks like when you're consuming a data source within Tableau Desktop. So you're in Tableau Desktop, this far left laptop icon. Imagine a next step is that you're connecting to data within Tableau Desktop. You'll connect to Tableau Server, sign into your server. The server's got the IP address, and the source comes from tableau.com. And then the data source that you connect to, this other arrow leads into your data that you're connected within your workbook. And the icon itself is what denotes it's for Tableau Server. So why encourage that use? This is the process is simplified with refreshes. The icon with regards to what you'll see within your content on Tableau Server GUI is the single database. And then if it's an extract, per extract, not the workbook where it includes that extract is this icon on the far right that includes the workbook in front of that database. We didn't talk about security on the last slide, so imagine that you're going to connect to a database and you have access to that database, but your coworker doesn't. However, you want to share the report and you don't want your coworker to have access or log in with credentials to that database. So what you can do while you're publishing up the data source is to embed credentials. This is the same thing that you would do if you were to publish up a workbook and set scheduling and authentication. You'll want to embed your credentials so that it doesn't prompt the user once they are opening the report within Tableau Server. So web authoring. I mentioned that the Tableau data source can be published up to Tableau Server and it can allow for web edit. Okay, but we have Tableau Desktop. So here are some reasons why you would want to use Desktop over using the server functionality for Web Author. So Web Author is being able to go to an existing workbook to edit that, or go to an existing data source and create a workbook from that. So why would we want to use desktop over server? Well, there are some server features that are not available. In version 9.0, a big win was being able to create calculations ad hoc and in the calculation editor. However, you still can't create and modify quick table calcs and table calculations since that's within the view, and what's calling back is to that data source locally. The creation of dashboards or storyboards, and then limited formatting capabilities. Now with that, there's some security considerations because you're working off of an existing workbook and an existing data source that has permissions. So those permissions are going to be applied to both. So how you set up those permissions will be important. Now I've really hit on the very high level. What I recommend is Andrew Pick's Tableau Public Viz about a comprehensive list, detailed out what you can and can't do with desktop versus web authoring. Now, why would you want to use web authoring? In the instance that you have a very casual user or you're in a meeting and someone says, well, what if I want to see sales by this dimension? And you're like, well, okay, let's go ahead and see that. But that user doesn't have desktop. Well, they can use Tableau Server. Now I'm getting into the use of guest user. And I'd say the content for guest user is to really pay attention to the light bulb that I have available in terms of the tips. So removing this guest user. But really, you need to understand the guest user first. So the guest user is a user that's going to be able to be used to share or view a visualization without needing to authenticate within server. So they don't need to have a license on server, but they can interact. They can interact with the URL link that you send or that embedded view that you put into another web page. Now the capabilities are all the way down to the download, but if they don't have desktop or Tableau Public, then there's no worries about it. This user is enabled on the Tableau server, so you cannot disable per site if you have multi-sites. So it's a end-all be-all kind of on or off switch. And so to remove the guest user capability, many don't even know that it's there. So to know where it is, it's within all users. It's a group. So your content is your project, your workbooks, your groups, your data. And this group itself within the content is what has guest. And you can't remove guest from assigning the permissions individually. You have to go ahead and remove that all users group and then add back those individuals or groups you wish to have there. Follow that hyperlink to mailsales@tableau.com. If you want guest user enabled, you'll need to up your license to a core. Now getting into some tips on what are some of the questions that you're going to get when providing support for this application. So many times you may get a user who cannot access a view. So to troubleshoot on the server, you'll look for a user and do they even exist? I know it sounds funny, but you always have to be able to check the on and off button. So are they there? Next, you'll check their site role, and then you'll check what groups they're assigned to. And then most of the times what we can provide back is the explanation that even though you're going down and permissioning a user to be able to download, they may only have a site role of an interactor, which as we saw in the cheat sheet, site role earlier on, and I think slide 2 or 3, the interactor cannot publish, so they wouldn't be able to do it anyway. So the top is looking at your site role, and then combined with what group are you specifically able to do it. So this is the decision tree, and there's more information within that online help catalog. The next information is what happens if you've set it within Tableau Desktop, because Tableau Desktop can overwrite those workbook level permissions that may be assigned to that project, or if permissions are changed on the user, but they don't necessarily reflect in the content. Most of the times you can solve that one by clicking this button, very important. Assign permissions to content. If you're on the server and you're going and editing the permissions for this person and the capabilities, it then registers it, but it doesn't populate it to the contents until you press this assign to permissions content. When working with support, very important to always provide this information here. The most important one is expand the show details. So we want to have a screenshot of the error, but I don't want the very first summary of the error. I want the details. So take that step to go ahead and say show details. Click on that and then copy the screenshot. For known issues, check there first before you go looking into specific issues related to your release itself. And then if you have questions on how to contact Tableau support, then always leverage them. Included within your cost is maintenance and support. So maintenance is renewal of that license, and then support is contacting them directly. So utilize what you have available. This is information for you to get started with releasing. So when I start a release, we'll want to know exactly what's included. Why are we interested in these features? If you're not quite up to the most recent version of Tableau, go to the alternate download site to get, say they're out on version 9.0.6 of server, but I'm only on 9.0.3, then I would want to go and get the download site for that server, as well as make sure that the desktop client doesn't go above the 9.03 desktop client that I have installed. Anything prior to the current version of Tableau Server is compatible. It's just when you get above your current server to desktop version that it stops the incompatibility. And then the richest resource, and the one that I go to most often, aside from Google, is the product support. So the online help, it's everything, the ins and outs of the product, and then go to Google if there's specific errors that you're receiving. And then the next and very second to last slide in this is using Tableau Server to service users. Tableau, in terms of providing information and content out to your users, having Tableau Server available as, say, a repository of information. Information can be anything. Yes, data in that tabular form, but what about other information? So images, links, that sort of thing. So creating a site, if you have a multi-user site, to be able to have that universal site for all users where you post workbooks related to training, the workbooks related to server usage and other resources like Tableau blogs, etc., to host things in a Tableau workbook that all of your users can see. So instead of spamming them with an email or pointing them to a repository of information, have them have that under their fingertips to go back to that Tableau server universal site to get the information that they would like. That's a tip from me to you. And then the server admin views. These are really handy, and these have information about your extracts, when did they run, and what type of user activity, and so on. But these are not downloadable, and so in terms of having requests from users to be able to see this for their users themselves, how often are my users logging in, what workbooks are they looking at, what's popular, what's not. You can get the workbook from your Tableau server location and then open it up in Tableau. And as long as you've got that read-only or the Tableau user enabled on your server, you'll be able to enter that information in to access Postgres and customize that as much as possible. So again, my name is Jen Vaughan. I brought to you today my information and knowledge about Tableau Server, how to start getting to know Tableau Server, getting to know why you need desktop versus server, as well as how you can leverage key parts of Tableau Server to be able to have that central repository of your data, be able to service your users and understand some tips and tricks within the enterprise. You can follow me on Twitter at Butterfly Story. I am also a Tableau Social Ambassador, so you'll get most of my information through Twitter and then my blog. If you want to see my further credentials, you can go ahead and check me out on LinkedIn. Best way to contact me and stay in touch is through Twitter. Very talkative there. So thank you very much, and I hope to provide you more information on Tableau in the future.
Great, thank you, Jen. We have one question that if you could answer just very briefly. I think you've already answered it, but the question comes from Aaron, and he asked, is there any workaround to publish 9.1 dashboards on a 9.0 or 9.0 server?
Sure, that's a good question, and it's one that Tableau has a knowledge base article out there for, and let me go ahead and see if I can Google that. And then since we're already on the Fringe with this Tableau Fringe Festival, I would say go to my website or my blog, tablaugen.wordpress.com, and I have a hack for that. It's not supported, and Tableau will tell you, do not do it.
Great. Well, and you know what? We'll make sure that Aaron gets that link, so that way you all can continue the conversation later. Thank you so much, Jen. This has been really great. You know, server is kind of foreign to me, but I think that you've provided a nice introduction to it for me and many others out there. So thank you so much for your time. And at, let's see, 2:45 East Coast time, we are going to start a conversation and let it go global using Tableau Public with Carl Alchin. Thanks, everybody, and see you soon.